Mind-blowing Quran miracle, ready to convert. All right, let's have a look at the Quran miracle here.
So chapter 32 is called Sajda, prostration.
Yes.
There are 30 verses. So the prostration verse is verse 15. And lo and behold, it has exactly 15 words. And not to mention the word prostration is the 186th word in this chapter. And if we add 1, 8 and 6 together, what do we get?
15, yes.
Which is the verse number of prostration. Let's take the prostration verse, multiply it by 2, we get 30, which is the total amount of verses in this chapter. Let's also take 186, which is the position that the word prostration comes.
Allahu Akbar. This cannot be a coincidence that you have like such hidden like numbers, and if you add them up, you even get the amount of verses that there are in everything, right? It's actually fascinating. Yeah, like we had a look the other day at like mathematical miracles in the Quran, and this is like that too, right?
Of verses in this chapter. Let's also take 186, which is the position that the word prostration comes in this chapter. We multiply that by 2, we get 372, which is the total words in this chapter.
Wow.
Coincidence? Not convinced? Well, let's look at chapter 71, which is the chapter of Noah. The total amount of verses are 28. So let's minus the verses from the chapter. 71 minus 28 is 43. So 43 is the amount of times Noah is mentioned in the Quran. There are 43 chapters after this chapter that do not mention Noah, and there are 43 chapters that come before that do not mention Noah either. How many do mention Noah? Well, it's 28. The number of verses in this chapter. Wait, there's more. Let's multiply the chapter by the verse.
What a coincidence. That's not a coincidence.
71 by 28.
Yeah, this is not a coincidence. Like, there are like many hidden messages and miracles in the Quran, not just mathematically, but even like if you look at like the scientific miracles, right? Like, this is something before I accepted Islam that I also need to mention. So, it talks in the Quran about a life that is smaller than a piece of dust, right? What is the smallest your eyes still can see? Dust, right? Dust is the smallest because dust is smaller than sand, right? So dust is like basically the maximum your eyes can see, right? And after that, you can see nothing else, right? And the Quran, it says there's a life form that's smaller than a piece of dust. This means bacteria, right? So it talks about bacteria in the Quran, but there was no microscope 1,400 years ago. It mentions the deep sea where you cannot see anything because it's completely black. If you look at like how long you would need to dive and the air pressure, this and this, no human being, not even the best diver on earth without the equipment, and back then they didn't have the breathing mask and then the oxygen tank and all that, right? Like you didn't have that 1,400 years ago. Like you cannot dive into the deep sea where it's totally black. This is impossible because if you dive down for just like over a minute, you will be out of breath, right? Like it's not possible. You need to get back up. Plus you need to calculate if you dive, you have to come back up because you also have the time to go up that you need, and you need to still have your breath, right? So yeah, even the best divers, there's no way they can reach the deep sea. It also mentions that the female, that the worker bee is female, and in order to actually identify the gender of insects, you also need a microscope, what was not around back in the day, right? Like, or how like clouds work, this and that. Like there are so many miracles in the Quran, not just mathematically, and also predictions about the fall of the Roman Empire. Like who would have known that the Roman Empire would fall in this and that, right? So there are like a lot of miracles even historically and stuff. So like this is so beautiful about Islam, and what also like drove me closer to it.
We get 1988, and the 1988th verse in the Quran has how many letters? Yes, that's right, 43. And for the maths boffins out there, 71 is the highest prime factor of 1988. I'm still not done. Yeah, if you look at Nuh is a 3-letter word. The first appearance of Nuh is in chapter 3. Yes. And it's first mentioned in verse 33. And in the chapter of Nuh, it is the third word mentioned 3 times.
Oh.
And lastly, the people of Nuh is mentioned 14 times. The 14th prime number is 43, which is the total number of times Nuh is mentioned. Now, what makes this more profound is the fact that the Quran was revealed circumstantially. In other words, when the Prophet was asked something or when something happened, that's when the verses would be revealed. So there was no way of the Prophet ﷺ predicting or preempting those questions. And secondly, the Prophet, peace be upon him, could not read or write. So he didn't sit there writing and then counting.
Yeah, this actually, what he just mentioned, I have to mention this again so people understand this, because this is of very, very high importance for this whole video about the mind-blowing Quran miracles. So, if you read the Quran and you come across certain events that took place, certain ayat in the Quran, certain verses, they came down with a certain event, and who knows what happens in the future? Only God knows, right? Only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows what will be asked or happen in the future, right? So if you look like at those mathematical miracles, what is if a certain event did not happen, right? Then a certain ayah, a certain verse would not have come down. That means this mathematical miracle, or how you see, oh, there are so many verses and this is how many times a certain prophet was mentioned, this and that. Like, if this cannot be by coincidence, right? Like this was like, oh, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knew this event would happen in the future. So all was like made like this, right? Like this is what is like so mind-blowing about it, because certain verses, they only came down because a certain question was asked by a Sahaba radiallahu anhu, or by an event that took place, and you can't like plan this out from the beginning of the first verse that comes down, right? Like you can't plan from the first verse until the last verse and the completion of the Quran, because in order to plan like this, you must know every event that will happen in the future, and only God, Allah, can know this, right? Because Allah knows the unseen, knows the future, this and that, right? Like knows everything. So yeah, this is definitely a miracle.
Writing and then counting the words and then mirroring it. So it would have been impossible for the Prophet to mastermind this literary miracle. And the cherry on the cake, the Quran was not revealed in chapter and verse order. So at the end of the Prophet's life, that's when all the written parts of the Quran were collected and collated.
Yes.
It was not done initially. So is there any wonder why so many people, Muslims and non-Muslims, are impressed by this book? The religion is the fastest growing on the planet, and why you, if you are Muslim, should be reading it and benefiting from it more,
and be proud of it.
If you're a non-Muslim, you read it and you accept Islam.
Wow, this is a very, very good video. Let me give this one a thumbs up. And yeah, like if you look at like those numbers and how they make sense, and like how many times a prophet is mentioned, how many times this verse is, and this and that, right? Like you can't plan this in advance unless you know what will happen in the future. So if a verse is connected with an event that takes place, you need to know that this event will take place in order to plan it like that. And this is why it is so mind-blowing, right? But yeah, you can, like, if you are non-Muslim or you are Muslim, I say this now to both, to non-Muslims and Muslims, like check out online the miracles of the Quran, the scientific ones, the mathematical ones, and the historic ones. They are all very mind-blowing, because not only does it predict certain things that happen in the future, like the fall of the Roman Empire, that also people will compete with like building large towers, this and that. There are also many Sahih hadiths that talk about the future from the Sunnah of our Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And even some of the Sahih hadiths are mind-blowing, because they speak about events that happen in the future, or about certain problems we see these days, and the widespread of fitna, of people wearing less and less clothes, that there are women that walk on the street that are even wearing clothes, but they are like naked. If you look back like 200 years ago, this was like not the case, this and that. Like there are so many interesting predictions and stuff that came to be true that you find in Sahih Hadiths, but also in the Quran. So Allahu Akbar, this is really mind-blowing. But yeah, if you guys are new to this channel, please don't forget to hit that subscribe button for more content. If you guys enjoyed this video, please don't forget to give this one a thumbs up. And I will see you guys next time, inshallah.